all popular film is political in that it rises out of specific social and political times. It can't help but reflect those times. And it also will then either not question the times that it has risen from, or it may question those times. Sometimes it does this unintentionally. The filmmaker isn't really trying to comment socially and politically. But good popular films do this intentionally. The filmmaker is trying, through the images he uses, the plot, the characters, all the various techniques that go into the movie making, to comment on social and political issues. For example, back in the 1950s, monster movies became very important. And you can look at these simply as people like seeing monsters, and they like watching monsters being destroyed. But the most intelligent of these films were deliberately Cold War films. And the dialogue in some of them makes this absolutely clear. There's no mistaking it. In others, you have to look a bit deeper at the way the images work. At the time of the Cold War, people were terrified of atomic warfare breaking out between the United States and Russia. And atomic fallout created all kinds of possible abnormalities in people, in nature. And the fears of people in the Cold War of these kinds of changes that would be brought about if war actually broke out are figured in these monster movies. The monsters are people's fears of all the terrible things that could happen in atomic warfare. And then the monsters are ultimately defeated. Science fiction film in particular is a way of distancing issues that people feel very, very strongly about in their own time and making them easier to deal with. People can deal with these issues at a distance, as it were, through science fiction, through pretending these are things that really don't exist. I don't think you can understand most of the science fiction films of the 1950s without understanding that they're a product of fears of atomic warfare, of the Cold War, in many cases of the Korean War. These films can still be enjoyed today in terms of their special effects, although they aren't very special compared to the special effects we have today, in terms of the stories they tell, in terms of their characters and whatnot. But these films become a lot more enjoyable, a lot more meaningful if we look at them in relation to the social and political times they came out of. The same thing is true if we look at films today. Steven Spielberg's Minority Report, for example, is a film that came out of security concerns at the end of the 20th and beginning of the 21st century, where people seemed to be losing their freedoms in order to try to protect themselves, and how politicians would use people's fears to manipulate them in this way. The latest Star Wars films of George Lucas, the second Star Wars trilogy, the prequels trilogy so-called, is about politics, about how unscrupulous politicians can gain power by manipulating people through their fears. And that trilogy came out from 1999 to 2005 at a time when there was a great deal of public conversation about how far does one go to curtail public freedoms in order to create public safety. The films are a part of that conversation, and they really can't be understood without being seen in that context. And they become much more interesting and much more intellectually demanding and much more a part of a meaningful conversation when we consider them in terms of that political and social context.